you snort laughed at my retelling
Yes.
of the altogether joke.
Yes.
So they were doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
What others might deem stupid shit, you know matters. You know it's worth talking and thinking about, and so do we. We're sisters Tracie and Emily, collectively known as the Guy Girls. Every week, we take turns rewatching, researching, and reconsidering beloved media and sharing what we learn. Come overthink with us, and if you get value from the show, please consider supporting us. You can become a patron on Patreon or send us a one-time tip through Ko-fi. Both links are in the show notes. And thanks.
I'm Tracie Guy-Decker, and you're listening to Deep Thoughts About Stupid Shit, because pop culture is still culture, and shouldn't you know what's in your head? Today, I'll be sharing my deep thoughts about the 1980 comedy classic Airplane with my sister, Emily Guy Birkin, and with you. Let's dive in. All right, Airplane! Exclamation point. What do you remember?
Vignettes, basically. So I remember, Shirley, you can't be serious. Yes, I'm serious, and don't call me Shirley. I regularly say I picked the wrong week to give up horse tranquilizers. That is something that is just part of my lexicon. Oh gosh, it's that actress who played someone like very wholesome talking jive.
Florence Henderson.
Florence Henderson, that's who it was.
The mom from the Brady Bunch.
Yes. So I remember that. I remember the drinking problem where he's just throwing water at himself. And yeah, I just remember it as being like silly fun. I also remember learning that it's I vaguely knew this, but that it was a parody of a movie called Airport, I believe.
Kind of.
And that it's one of those situations where the parody has lasted longer than what it was making fun of, which I've been thinking about recently because of Good Omens. Because apparently people will go back and watch Omen and be like, oh my God, this is Good Omens.
Right.
And it was like, well, no, that was intentional. This was supposed to be a parody. That's why it was called that. So I find that really interesting. The idea that you could create a satire that is so beloved on its own that you don't need to know the source material to love the satire. And then it's the Zucker brothers, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's basically the extent of what I remember about Airplane. I am a little worried that this is going to be a childhood ruining episode.
Rightfully.
And probably good to know before I show it to my kids. If I should maybe not. Gotcha.
Maybe not.
Maybe.
Well, we'll see.
Maybe just the vignettes.
Not yet. Maybe not yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Not yet.
So tell me, why are we talking about Airplane today?
Yeah, I've done a few in recent weeks. I've brought a few that, reminded me of Dad or The Little Mermaid with our stepdad, that were a little more serious or heartfelt or whatever. And so when we were planning last, I was like, I really want something that's like a comedy. I want to do some comedies. And so like this one, for whatever reason, like popped in my brain as like a comedy that I remember Dad laughing out loud to. And just like, kind of like you, is just in my brain as just really, really funny. And that was pretty much all I had, except for like there were specific moments, as you have, vignettes from the film that I remembered, but mainly just like I just remember laughing. So figure let's take a look. So and this film remains, like, when people vote on like funniest films of all time, it often shows up in the top 20 or even the top 10. Like, it is a beloved comedy. So I thought it was, worth looking at. And there's a lot to unpack. We don't have time, even if we go over our usual time, to unpack everything. So I want to talk a bit about sort of what you named and the ways in which we can be very topical and sometimes it remains funny and sometimes it doesn't make any sense anymore when the original topical thing falls out of the sort of common lexicon. I want to, we'll talk about gender and race and actually homophobia. And
I was thinking that there's probably quite a bit of homophobia in it.
And
just considering the time.
A bit, there's some, and also just like what is acceptable to make a punchline and how that has changed. Rightfully so, I think. So we'll talk about some of those things, and I think we may get into sort of meta conversations about comedy as a result of this film, I think. But yeah, so there's a few things to talk about. But let me start by giving you a brief rundown of the plot of this thing,
such as it is.
Yeah, this shouldn't take as long as it often does. So I will say from the very beginning, they set the stage that this is absurdist. The very first scene, we're looking at like clouds, and then like the tail wing of a plane kind of moves through the screen to the Jaws theme. And it goes back and forth across the screen like 3 times before then the plane kind of goes over the camera so that you get the full size of this airliner. So from the beginning, like, we know this is basically a cartoon, a caricature, and it's just silly. So the film actually, you named Airport, it was meant to kind of spoof those disaster films like Poseidon Adventure and Airport.
And Towering Inferno, and
like those sort of disaster films of the 70s. So this came out in 1980. So definitely viewers in 1980 would have gotten the reference to Airport, even with the title. But the actual plot is a sort of remake or a retread of a movie called 0 Hour! ! Which I guess is where the exclamation point came from in the title. But so the plot is basically there's after the Jaws plane opening, we're at an airport. We're hearing ridiculous like announcements over the intercom that are just ridiculous, where there are 2 people making announcements back and forth and they end up arguing with one another. We see it's not initially Hare Krishnas. It's like some other, like the Church of Universal Consciousness or something like that, who are giving flowers out and asking for donations. And we see a stewardess come into the airport and interact with these Church of Universal Consciousness or whatever it was. And then we see a cab pull up like abruptly, like up halfway onto the curb. And a businessman gets in and tells the cabbie where he wants to go. But the cabbie gets out and says, "I'll be right back," turns on the meter and runs into the airport. So this is Ted. The cabbie is Ted. And he's chasing after Elaine, the stewardess we initially saw. They catch up with one another and it becomes clear Elaine is leaving him. They've been together for a while and she's leaving him. That's just not the same anymore. He doesn't have any ambition. He just needs to get things together. And like, it becomes clear the guy has PTSD, though it wouldn't have been called that in 1980 from the war. And the original movie, that was the case as well. The original movie was made closer to the end of World War II, so it was about World War II. This movie in 1980, they keep talking about the war, and in the flashbacks, it seems to be World War II, like uniforms, but it's really unclear what war he's talking about. He buys a ticket to get on the flight that she is about to work, so that he can try and convince her to stay with him.
Meanwhile, his cab is still just...
The meter's still going. Like, we cut back to the guy in the cab several times. In fact, there's a post-credit scene where the dude is still sitting there. At one point, we see the meter is up to like $1,300 or something. Well, the guy's just sitting there. That's pretty much how Dad laughed at the post-credit scene.
I don't know why that's
in
so
1980.
Funny.
Okay, so we're on this flight and we meet a host of characters, and there are so many gags, like so many jokes. I can't possibly convey them all. In fact, I will link to this in the show notes. Somebody for some sort of dissertation or thesis or something like counted the gags. There are 220 gags in 88 minutes running time. So
and like there's a like sight gags as well as like
sight gags,
puns,
wordplay, like there's a lot going on. Like just it's like so fast. There's it's absurd and just so quick. And there's a couple of different types, and I'm sure I won't capture them all, but I'll get into that. But anyway, back to the plot. So Ted and Elaine are on this flight. We learn that Ted is a former pilot. He was in charge of a mission where 7 men in his squadron died, and he blames himself, and he hasn't been near a plane since. So even getting on this flight is a difficult thing for him. He's having to sort of push through resistance because, he has all of this guilt and like I say, PTSD, though that's not what they would have called it then. So he's on this flight, waxing poetic about Elaine. We see several flashbacks of their time together. He's boring his fellow passengers, like to the point that they are harming themselves to get out of speaking to him about this.
Oh my goodness.
They serve dinner on the flight, which I guess, I don't remember this, but like people had a choice between the steak or the fish. Every passenger who has the fish gets ill, including the captain, the co-pilot, and the navigator, all 3 of them. So there's no one on the plane.
That's actually, that is, I don't know when this was instituted, but if there is a flight where there is going to be served a meal, they specifically, even if they don't have choices for the passengers, they specifically have different meals for the captain and co-pilot to make sure that that's just in case
that doesn't happen.
Yep.
Yeah. So, okay. So Ted is the only person who has any chance of landing this plane. So, he does, basically, like with help from the ground crew. And of course, the ground crew is like a guy who used to serve with him, and they hate each other. And we get scenes from the tower, and the guy in charge of the tower is the one who says, I picked the wrong week to quit smoking, drinking, sniffing glue, horse tranquilizers. Like it just builds, like that gag goes over and over again. So they do end up, he lands the plane and everybody's okay. That's the basic plot. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Because the vignettes we remember were the point.
Yeah.
Right?
That's just the skeleton that you hang the funny on.
Exactly. And the different kinds of gags, there's wordplay, like, surely you can't be serious. I am serious, and please don't call me Shirley. Like those kinds of wordplay, which for me personally are the funniest. Like I actually laughed out loud at one point. Ted says to 2 other people, so another steward is not Elaine, Randy, and the doctor, who is Leslie Nielsen, he says to them, I'm the wrong person to fly this plane altogether. And then they say back, the 2 of them in unison, you're the wrong person to fly this plane. And like, I just, yeah, me too. Like that was the funniest moment for me, was when he said the word altogether and then the 2 of them repeated back what he had said. So that's one of the sort of recurring kinds of gags. Then there's a lot of gags where something absolutely ridiculous and like off the chain happens and characters don't respond. Right? So like a guy comes to the house to pick up the ground crew guy who used to serve with Ted, who's going to help talk him down. And the golden retriever like attacks him. He's like on the ground with the family dog, like snarling and like chewing on him. And he and his wife are just talking as if it's like not happening. And like before they take off, it's as if he's in it there. It's as if the plane is in a gas station and there's like an attendant who like cleans the windshield and like opens up the nose cone, like to check the oil or whatever. And like when he closes the nose cone, he kind of slips and falls, like, cause it's up on a ladder at the top of this plane, and the pilot and co-pilot just keep talking like nothing's happened. So that's like a recurring thing where something outrageous that should elicit some sort of reaction elicits no reaction. That's a regular gag. Then there's also sort of the like, there's a lot of breaking expectations. So in one of the memories, in one of the sort of flashbacks, the two protagonists, Ted and Elaine, are in this seedy bar. It's where they met, like while he was stationed overseas, and a fight breaks out, and it's between two Girl Scouts, and it's like a really fierce knockdown drag out fight. Yeah. But they're both Girl Scouts. Yeah. And then he dances. He's wearing like he says he's in the Air Force, but he's wearing like a white Navy uniform, like A Few Good Men, the dress uniform. And he goes out onto the dance floor and like pulls off the blouse of the uniform and is now wearing like the outfit from Saturday Night Fever with the black shirt and the white, and dances like Saturday Night Fever. So that's sort of like unexpected, which was also a topical reference, which, you know, even today that got a chuckle out of me. There are gags where someone says something that their identity doesn't match with. So like the Florence Henderson talking jive is an example of that, which does not hold up. I'll come to that. Yeah, but there's another moment where like there are two children, like maybe 10, and like very like formally dressed, and the girl is sitting by herself in the row in the plane, and the boy comes up and he says, "May I offer you some coffee?" And she says, "Yes, I'd love some." And he sits down next to her and they're drinking coffee, and he says, "Do you need any cream?" She says, "No, I like it black, like my men." And these are two white kids. So like moments like that where the thing the person said is incongruous with their identity based on, you know, expectations of their identity. And it's funny. And it's 220 gags in 88 minutes. And some of the gags, they're not funny. And I don't think they were funny in 1980. So like an example, apparently in the movie Airport, or maybe in 0 Hour, I'm not sure which one at the moment. I knew before we hit record, but now I've forgotten which one. A boy visits the cockpit, like a passenger, a young boy who's a passenger visits the cockpit just to see the plane. Oh, like they do. Little kids like they do, right? And they give him wings or whatever. And the pilot like welcomes him with a hug. Well, in this movie, the pilot is like straight up a pedophile. Like he's like, "Oh, let him stay." And then at one point, like that's where, "Hey, Joey, have you ever seen a grown man naked?" And like, "Have you ever visited a Turkish bath?" And like, that is the joke. He is a pedophile. I don't think that was funny even in 1980. Yeah. The joke with the guys, there aren't a whole lot of, there's not a lot of racial diversity in the movie, except where it's a joke, right? So these two black men who are on the plane who speak in jive, that's the word that is used in the movie, and requires subtitles. And that's part of the gag. Like they'll say a thing and then the subtitles say like, "Golly gee, if that white man doesn't do blah, 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 I'm going to hurt him." And like, you know, it's like the juxtaposition of what is said in the subtitles is part of the gag. But the men's identity is the joke, which I don't think is funny. Yeah. Right. And then Florence Henderson says, "Oh, I speak jive." Like, but that's the joke over and over again, is that white people don't understand these two men. That's another one that I think just isn't funny. Even in 80, anyway, there's a scene. So things are bad. Like it's stormy. It's not just that they don't have a pilot. It's also like really stormy. And there's everybody's sick, like they need to get to the hospital because they're sick. And so at one point, Leslie Nielsen, who's the doctor, who prior to this role had only played dramatic roles. So that was another sort of part of the...
That was something I remember when I learned that. I was really surprised because I only knew him in parodies.
And he became a comedic talent, like name, like a comedic icon almost. But prior to this movie, he had only been known for his dramatic chops.
Well, and that's part of the reason why he plays such a straight character.
And that's why he was chosen to play this straight man in this piece. So there's a scene between him and Randy, one of the stewardesses. And she's crying and he says, I don't remember what he says, but he sort of asks after Randy's well-being, and she just says, "I'm so scared. I've never been so scared. And I'm 26 and I'm not even married." And like, that's part of what she's upset is like, she's missed out on being married. So then another female he's comforting her. Another female passenger comes over and is chatting with them. And he says, "How are you holding up?" She says, "I'm just so scared. I've never been this scared in my whole life, but at least I've got a husband." And like, I don't think that's funny. I don't think that was funny in 1980. That same female character, actually earlier in the film, she's like really freaking out, like having like what one would term hysterical. Like she's having a panic attack and it's loud.
Oh,
and
is that when there's the whole line of people slap her? Yeah.
Right.
But and some of them have like a pipe?
Baseball bats. Yeah. Pipe. Yes. And so, first we see Leslie Nielsen, the doctor, kind of shake her, like take her shoulders and shake her and say, "Get a hold of yourself," and like slap her face. And then he's called away because somebody else needs him. So the nun who's on board shakes her and slaps her. And then like somebody sort of pushes her aside, and then the camera pans back, and as you say, there's like a whole line of people lining up to abuse this woman. Not funny. Not funny.
I have a question though, because I remember that at least I'm married one, and I did remember the slapping one, and I remember taking those as making fun of the idea that we like making fun of the misogyny. I remember how I took it. Now that doesn't mean that's how the Zuckers meant it. But I just remember it being like, this is bullshit. Isn't this bullshit? About like the idea that whether or not you're married matters when you're in a life or death situation, particularly for women. And then the idea that like, the way that you deal with someone who is panicking is to commit violence. It's like so ridiculous that we consider this normal. And so like it's reductio ad absurdum kind of thing. I don't know. That's the way that I took it. I have not seen it in probably 25 years.
In situ, I'm not sure that's, I don't know. I mean, maybe, but except that like they skewer everything, right? Everything. But the fundamental chassis of this relationship between Ted and Elaine remains. He has to prove that he's like man enough.
Yeah.
And then she comes back. And there are moments. There's a lot more sexual content in this movie than I remembered as well.
I'm sure that went over our heads.
Yeah. So like when they're talking about Ted and Elaine are sort of reminiscing about their time together. Like, do you remember this? Do you remember that? And she says, "I remember sitting on your face and wriggling until the sun came up," or something like that. And then there's this automatic pilot, which is like an inflatable, I don't know, like this human-shaped egg, but it starts to deflate, and that's a problem. And so she has to manually reinflate it with this tube that's at the belt level. So when Leslie Nielsen like comes into the cockpit, it looks like she's given the autopilot a blowjob. And then they like lean on that because after he's reinflated, they both are sitting there. They're both smoking cigarettes.
Why would she need one?
Exactly.
My exact point about the baked-in misogyny. You got it on one, Em.
Yeah, here's something that I think would be interesting. Is I am curious if there is a like I've never been so scared before, and I never got married, and a hysterical or panicking woman passenger who is slapped in either airport or 0 hour.
Or 0 hour.
Because that, and to your point, it doesn't matter if there is or not, because the misogyny is baked in. But if there are those things in the original, like part of what I take this film as being is like making fun of skewering, like the disaster movies, like showing how over the top the drama is in those disaster movies. So I'm not going to say that this excuses those gags.
No, but it does kind of explain
contextualize.
where they came
Yeah.
from. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, and that is an excellent question, and that may well be the case.
Yeah,
it may well, because in 0 hour, the Ted character, his name is not Ted, has a drinking problem, and so they skewer that by the drinking problem you remember, where every time he's got a glass in his hand, like he can't reach his mouth, so he ends up just like throwing liquid at his face over and over and over again because he has a quote unquote drinking problem. So yeah, you might be right. You might be right. And that actually would contextualize it in a way that would make it feel less
mean-spirited.
Yeah, that's a great word. That's a great word. So, another mean-spirited piece is in the tower, in the control tower, there's the guy who runs the place, then the former, what's the word I'm looking for? Comrade. That's not the word I'm looking for. The guy who served with, and then the guy who served with Ted, who they brought in. And then there's a bunch of sort of nameless guys who work in the control tower. And then there's Johnny. And Johnny is flamboyantly gay.
I remember that character.
And apparently only exists to give flamboyantly gay non sequiturs in the background. In a way that is ridiculous and mean-spirited on the part of the movie makers. Yeah. Not on Johnny's part.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm trying to think. I think that Johnny is the only sort of like, in a surprising sort of way, he's the only kind of specific moment that I can think of abject, explicit homophobia, which there could have been a lot more in 1980. Yeah. Right. It was something that people traded on for humor quite a lot. And it's not there much, but Johnny's pretty darn mean-spirited, as a figure. The other thing that I want to name that is complicated, in flashback, after the war, Elaine and Ted join the Peace Corps, and they are assigned to a tribe somewhere, I suppose, in Africa, or I don't know. But the tribe is all black folks. And Ted is like teaching them about physical fitness. And so teaches them to play basketball. Oh, man. And the joke is that like Ted like sets up a basket and like tosses the ball toward the basket and misses. And then the tribe like almost immediately are like the Harlem Globetrotters, like spinning the ball on their finger, and like every single shot they make goes in. And of course he takes credit for that. And
oh my goodness. So it's terrible in every direction. So we got the white saviorism and the idea of inherent ability.
Yeah. I mean, we're meant to think he's ridiculous for taking credit for it. We're meant to see that he did not have anything to do with the fact that these men are good at basketball. But
part of the reason why that's ridiculous is because of course they're good at basketball.
Right. Oh. So it's like
the layers of racism like baked into that sort of flashback scene are like are almost difficult for me to unpack because there's just so many of them. Now, the actual portrayals of the men, like of the men in the tribe, was, I mean, I'm not going to say it was good, but it wasn't like as horrible as I was expecting when I'm watching this 2 nights ago. And he says we were, assigned to this tribe, and I see, him and Elaine walking with a bunch of black folks in like, traditional, I'm putting quotes around that, traditional African garb. I was like, oh no, what? And it was bad. But in terms of their actual physical features and dress, it wasn't nearly as bad as I was anticipating. So I guess I'd like to like unpack with you a little bit what the Zuckers could have done differently, maybe. Because I think in some ways, like, I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you remember actually. So listeners, when we were kids, sometimes we would like, somebody would say a joke at the dinner table, and like, it might even be mean-spirited or cut too close to the quick. And we would say like part of how we would apologize would be like, you got to go for the joke, go for the joke, go for the joke. Like, go for the joke was like an explanation for why we had cut too close to the quick. And I think that I can say that about the Zuckers in this movie. Go for the joke, right? That's their mistake. So, and 220 gags in 88 minutes. And a lot of them, I mean, I think in 1980, probably most of them were really, really funny to the people watching. And even today, all these years later, 44 years later, it's still like, you snort laughed at my retelling
Yes.
of the altogether
Yes.
joke.
Yes.
So they were doing something right, So one of the things that occurs to me, and then I want to like unpack this with you. One of the things that occurs to me that they could have done differently when I think about some of the specific jokes that bother me now are diversify their writing team.
Yes.
Right? It was 3 white dudes. It was the Zucker brothers and one other person who's, sorry, dude, I don't remember your name. I looked it up. I don't remember. Sorry. So it was 3 white dudes. It was who were producing, and then the writers were all white. Like, so I think, diversifying the writing cast, the writing team is one like obvious thing, not just racially, ethnically, but just, lots of different ways. Like, you're going to make jokes about women and marriage. Like, do you have a woman on the writing team? You're going to make don't make jokes about pedophiles. I don't care what the context is or what you're spoofing. Like, just don't do it. It's not funny. But you're going to make jokes about the way Black folks speak to one another. You better have a Black person on the writing team or a sensitivity reader before you, like something.
I do want to push back real quick. Not that I'm like married to pedophile jokes, but I think that there are things that it is very, very difficult to joke about, like pedophilia, like rape. But I don't think that it is impossible. And what it has to be is that you have to be making fun of the awful person and not making fun of a situation where someone is in peril, which is what the problem is here. Like, there's this child is in peril, and it is not, the humor is not in the fact that like, look at this horrible loser and whatever. And I don't have one off the top of my head of how that would work, but there have been comedians who have told jokes about rape or rape culture that have punched up in the way that they should. So John Mulaney, for instance, talks about how he, in his like late 20s and early 30s, would forget that he's a grown man. And so he was at a subway in New York, and there was one other person there. It was a woman. And he was walking behind her, and she was walking quickly. And he was like, oh no, am I going to miss the train? Because it was late at night. And so she started walking quicker. So he started walking quicker. So she started running. So he started running, like maybe she can hear the train coming. And then as he's running and she's like busting it, he realizes like, oh yeah, I'm an adult man who's 6 feet tall, and adult men do horrible things to people. She's afraid of me. And like, so the humor is entirely at his expense because he's the one who's acting inappropriately. And so that there are, and he's the one who is so naive. So there are ways to tell these jokes, but this is not it. So I just wanted to put a pin in that.
You. That's helpful to nuance that, because the way that it happens in Airplane, the pilot is in every other way. I mean, he's not a hero, but he's not a villain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in fact, when he falls ill, that's actually like the last straw that really indicates that this plane is in big danger, because he's the last of the crew, of the flight crew, the cockpit crew. He's the last of the cockpit crew to fall ill. So yes. And good point. You know, I bet, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about your idea about whether or not there were like somebody slapped a woman in the source material. I bet they did, because one of the other big gags is that the co-pilot is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The actor is the basketball player Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and the character's name is Roger Murdoch. But the same kid who's in peril from Captain Over, is says, I know who you are. You're Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and says something about his game. And in the end, when he gets sick and they pull him out, he's wearing like basketball shorts. And that was because in 0 Hour, one of the flight crew was like a former professional football star, but he was just being an actor. And so like that, the joke was in reference to this earlier movie. So I bet that you're right that those two moments were in fact kind of informed by so what is now lost.
Something that I think that I'm thinking about the way that these jokes were written and how that tells us that there was no diversity in the writer's room, which obviously we can see that. But so I'm very literal, as we all know. And so what I liked about this film when I was a kid is that its humor is literal. So like, I'm the wrong person altogether. And then you're the wrong person.
No, the wordplay is very much Amelia Bedelia kind of wordplay jokes.
Yeah. Yeah. There's they said, oh, the shit's going to hit the fan.
And then we actually see shit hit the fan.
Yeah. And even the kind of like the gags that you're talking about where the way someone presents is not who they are is also a kind of literal sort of looking at the world. So like in that conversation between the little kids sounds like a very specific thing, but it doesn't have to be. It's like this feels like it was written by people who were neurodivergent enough to take things literally, but neurotypical enough to know when it was absurd and when it was not supposed to be taken literally. And I feel like the way that you were talking about the characterization of Black folks and the homophobia and women and all of that is that there were things that they took as given or literal that aren't, just because they were cultural and they did not examine them.
Yes, that's well said. Because I think that the fundamental relationship between Ted and Elaine, which is unexamined, which they take as given, didn't have to be. Like, Elaine is nothing. She's really nothing. And like, not that Ted is like a, complicated character, but there's more to him than there is to Elaine. Yeah. And like, in the end, like the other men want to shake his hand and buy him a drink. Like and she's really just a prize. That's really all she is. So, which, you know, I'm not, I know it sounds like I am skewering the Zuckers for this, and to an extent I am, but really I'm skewering our culture, because the same can be true for Marion in Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. And she's potentially a huge badass, but in the end, she's just a prize for Indy, because that was what women were in our stories. So
because only men were writing our stories, the ones that got wide appeal, or
right. So I'm disappointed with the Zuckers, but I'm more disappointed with our culture, I guess, is what I want to say. But the way you just phrase it is I think exactly right. That part of what is so disappointing is that they were examining everything, and then when they didn't, it stands out. Yeah.
And that's such a missed opportunity, because there is so much humor that one could find in these, like, even just the relationship between Ted and Elaine. Like, the only thing that she does that's subversive is like when she says, like what you're saying, like, I remember sitting on your face. Like, and that's not,
I mean, she leaves him.
Yeah.
She leaves him in that sense. But even that, like, she leaves him because he's like not man enough. I'm putting quotes around that. Like, which I don't know how that read in 1980. Like, reading it now, like, it just makes her all the more shallow seeming. That, you know, like, we see in flashback her sort of at his hospital bed after, you know, this mission went wrong, and he's just racked with guilt at the death of his crew members. What do airmen call each other? I don't know. Anyway, he's racked with guilt at the death of these men whom he led, and that's why he is having a hard time finding himself and finding, like, his next profession, and has no ambition, because he's still hurting.
He's traumatized. Yeah.
It's only been 6 years, according to the film itself, since all of this happened. So, you know, she's even within the context of the film, like, she's just nothing. So the most subversive thing she does is leave him. But even that is really just a plot device to force him onto the plane.
And I have absolutely no doubt that is directly from 0 Hour or Airport.
Oh, no, it is. It most definitely is.
Yeah.
It most definitely is.
So, I mean, that's not even...
And the difference is she's not a stewardess. She's like they're both on their way someplace or something. But no, for sure, that is direct. The plot is directly from 0 Hour. Yeah. And then it made more sense because it was closer. It was made closer in proximity to World War II. So it actually was like, you know, and like some of the jokes, like in flashback when we see Ted kind of like freaking out, like having a bit of a panic attack, and we see the same like old footage of like a plane hitting a mountainside, which was meant to be the mission. And then there's other film of like even older planes, and then there's that like historic film of that plane with the like 6 wings that's kind of flap up and down, and it falls over, and like all of this old, like, clearly not him.
Yeah.
You know, like the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk kind of looking film of flights. Like, so it's all absurd. Like, even his trauma is sort of absurdified, you know? And in some ways that's like a skewering of films themselves, where we see sort of the flashback overlaying over someone. We have another moment like that where the film, the medium, is made fun of, where the poor guy who gets attacked by the golden retriever and the guy who served with Ted are in the car, and there's like a screen behind them, and the car does not, like, what he's doing with the wheel doesn't match up at all with the screen behind them. It's just like, it's totally disjointed, which is visually very funny, you know? And that's, I think, making fun of the convention of that screen.
this kind of brings me back to like what I was saying, which is that they took the time to think like, what's expected and how can we skewer that? What's expected and how can we turn that on its head? But they didn't ask themselves what's expected and how can we turn that on its head with this central relationship?
Right.
Because that, like, and you know, some of it is because there are some things that you have to have in order to have a movie. And so they're like starting with like, okay, well, it needs to be about 90 minutes long. It needs to have like a skeleton of a plot that hangs together. Like there are certain things that they're like, we need to have this bone structure in order to make this parody. And they assume that this is part of the bone structure.
Yeah, they treated the woman as prize as part of the bone structure.
Yes.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So, all right. This film, let me just say quickly, this film does actually pass the Bechdel test.
Way to go, Zucker brothers.
Bechdel test.
Third guy.
And third guy. So Bechdel test, as a reminder from Alison Bechdel, we ask ourselves 3 questions about a movie. Does it have at least 2 female characters with names? Do they talk to each other? And do they talk to each other about something other than a boy or a man? And so Randy, the stewardess, plays guitar for, there's a girl who is on her way to Chicago to get a heart transplant. And Randy plays the guitar for her. She has a name, which I don't remember, but she definitely has one. Mm-hmm. And so they talk about music and the song and the guitar. So it does pass Bechdel. It's a pretty low bar, but it does pass it. So way to go. And it's funny when we do research for these, I don't know how you do it, Em, but like I actually often will just Google the name of the movie and then the word analysis, or sometimes feminism, or sometimes like race and gender or whatever. When I was searching for this one, I came upon the Common Sense Media review.
Yeah.
And Common Sense, I think they do important work, right? They help parents kind of judge. I think they missed the mark on this one.
Oh.
They were like, there's a little bit of nudity because you see boobs at one point. And like some minor violence because they have like these fist fights and stuff. But on the whole, it's just a screwball comedy or something like that. And I was like, I disagree, Common Sense.
Yeah.
Like, I certainly won't want your kids to be watching this without you. Mm-hmm. Without you there to like talk about some of the things.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's not much else there. That's pretty much what I've got. Do you have any final thoughts on this before I see if I can wrap up what we said?
I would like to talk like just a little bit meta about the the way that the parody survives and the original work has fallen out of public consciousness. That is a very weird thing.
So there's something. I think when we zoom out even further from that, that's actually a symptom of the ways in which a piece of media can completely captivate the zeitgeist and then not. Mm-hmm. And like knowing what piece, which is everywhere, is going to stay somewhere and what isn't, I think is, I don't know. I don't know how you know that in the moment, because that's ultimately what is happening when the parody has a longer life than that which it parodied, right? Like The Omen, in the example that you brought in, was a really big horror movie. It was like the horror movie, right? It's not anymore. I've never seen it. Of course, I haven't seen many horror movies, but it doesn't have the same sort of cultural cache that it did when it was new, which makes sense that it doesn't have the same kind of cultural cache. And also, there are other things that were, similarly large, which still do. Like I would probably name The Shining as one, right? And that was also the horror movie when it was new. And I think a parody of The Shining that was made, I expect we would know, like, oh yeah, yeah, right. The long hallway, the big wheel, the twins, like.
What's interesting to me is both in this example and in Good Omens. Now, I've seen parts of The Omen. It is a good movie. It's well done. I have not seen Airport or 0 Hour, but I have seen like Tower Inferno, Poseidon Adventure. And I'm not going to say they're badly done movies, but the genre is...
Yeah, it's over the top. I'm not sure 0 Hour was... I'm not sure 0 Hour was intended to be known. Like, I think that was where they got the plot.
Okay.
But I don't know that people... I could be wrong about this. And so, listener, if you remember, or if this is one of your movies that you want to like correct me here, but based on my research, I was under the impression that Airport would have been known to all of the viewers in 1980.
Okay.
0 Hour would have been invisible to them. It was just where the plot came from.
Gotcha. Okay. So here's what I find interesting is that with Good Omens, that is a very well written story, in part because as angry as I am at Neil Gaiman right now, he and Terry Pratchett, and I have no anger towards Terry Pratchett, are masters of their craft.
Yeah.
And so they're making a parody, and it's more than just a parody. There is more in there than just a parody. So its longevity makes sense to me because, damn. Airplane's longevity compared to its source material is harder to understand because I'm not saying the Zuckers are not gifted. They are. But what like, and I guess it's the 220 gags in 88 minutes. I guess that's what it is. Like
some of which still make us snort laugh.
Yeah.
I actually think that matters.
Yeah.
I mean, another another example of sort of the parody, like outliving, like I would have no idea who Liberace was, I think, if it weren't for Bugs Bunny. Right? Like Bugs Bunny sitting down at the piano, with the candelabra saying, "I wish my brother George were here," is a parody of Liberace, which I only know because I was like, what is Bugs Bunny talking about? And I'm a nerd and I looked it up. So, but when Bugs Bunny was new,
everyone knew what he was talking about.
Yes. When those shorts were being released, all the viewers knew exactly who he was talking about when he sat down at the piano. And so, but there's something about, I think, the humor aspect. Same with Good Omens, actually, right? Like Good Omens, like the book alone, right? Like rereading it in the past 2 years, the other 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, I
so funny.
Cried. I was laughing so hard.
Yeah.
You know? So I'm guessing. I'm like crafting this thought as I'm speaking. But I think that the humor and the ability for the joke to continue to elicit laughs is a factor that can contribute to longevity for us, you know, examples like this where there is a spoof happening and the original not funny that was being spoofed kind of fades into obscurity.
Do you know that fits a little bit with what I've been thinking a little bit lately about Bloom County, the Burke Breathed comic strip. I'm taking an illustration class right now at MIAD, Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. And I don't remember how we got into it, but I was talking to the instructor about how I feel lucky that I grew up in what felt like the golden age of newspaper comics, because every single day we had a new Bloom County, we had a new Far Side, and we had a new Calvin and Hobbes. And I've introduced my kids to all 3 of them, and I had remembered Bloom County having political jokes that went over my head. Like I had no idea who Jean Kirkpatrick was, and she was a regular, regularly showed up in Bloom County. No idea who she was, but it was still very funny. Like even 8 and 9-year-old me could enjoy the animals being goofy, even though like Lee Iacocca jokes made no sense. But Iacocca is a funny name. You know? And so I wonder if that has something to do with it too, where like if you reach that sweet spot of funny where it doesn't matter that you don't know what it's being referenced, that allows for longevity. Because I still look back on Bloom County fondly and like will happily go back and reread them, even though 40 years on, like whatever he's talking about that was topical at the time is gone.
Yeah. I think that definitely is a factor. I think that's right, Em. I think humor, and I think that absurd, but kind of, it's like walking that line of absurdism that like the absurdity itself remains funny. Not so far that it's just like, what?
Well, it's very neurodivergent friendly humor. Because,
well, especially, I mean, if rewatching is one of the hallmarks of neurodivergent friendly, which we have suggested it is, rewarding repeat viewings, this movie for sure, because there's stuff going on in the background at all times. That's the only way you could get 220 gags into 88 minutes.
Yeah.
So, all right, let me see if I can reflect back what we talked about. So Airplane, ! From 1980. This film was Leslie Nielsen's first comedic role. Certainly not his last. And it was a movie that lampooned the whole genre of disaster films that were popular at the time, including Airport, which is why it was named what it was named, but also there was The Poseidon Adventure and Towering Inferno. And other sort of disaster movies. So this movie lampooned those films. It borrowed the plot from a movie called 0 Hour! Which may or may not have been well known to viewers in 1980. I suspect not, but I could be wrong about that. This was a gag, more than a gag a minute, and it was very much following like our family's like go for the joke mantra, even if it was borderline mean-spirited or straight up mean-spirited. So there were several different kinds of gags that showed up, and the person who counted the 220 named some of them. I will link to that article in the show notes, folks. If you're like really deep into like the mechanics of humor, you might enjoy that. Some of the ones that I named in particular were the wordplay, which are sort of in the same vein as Amelia Bedelia. So the kind of thing like when Ted says to the doctor, "Surely you can't be serious," and the doctor responds, I am serious, and don't call me Shirley." So those sorts of like literal wordplay, or the one that made both Emily and myself snort laugh, which was "I'm the wrong person for this altogether," and then the other two people talking repeat back the original phrase as if he was asking them to say it all at once. Other gags included sort of visual slapstick that the other characters play as if it's not happening. So examples of that when the mechanic falls off the nose cone of the plane and the pilot and co-pilot do not react. Like when the golden retriever is attacking the driver, who comes to the house to pick up the pilot who's going to talk talk Ted down from the ground, and the pilot himself and his wife act as if nothing untoward is happening. So moments like that. We also saw that, I didn't name this, but we also see that in flashback when Ted and Elaine are like kissing on the beach and like huge waves crashing over them, so that there's like seaweed and stuff all over them, and they're just like acting like it's not happening. So things like that happen. We also see moments of subverted expectation, which is how humor works. We have said that repeatedly, but specifically around someone doing or saying something that is incongruous with our expectations of their identity. So examples of that include Florence Henderson saying she speaks fluent jive, and the two kids where the little girl who looks to be about 8 says she likes her coffee black the way she likes her men.
You know, I'm actually wondering if that's what they were going for with the pedophile jokes. If they were going for like the subversion of like, you expect this like pilot to be, you know, a hero. And so this is the subversion, because at the time it might not have occurred to the Zuckers that like there is no specific version of what that looks like.
Possibly. Yeah, possibly. Before we realized just how unfortunately, how prevalent it actually can be. Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe. Some of the jokes that don't hold up are ones in which the person's identity becomes the joke, right? So the two black guys who speak jive, and we need subtitles to understand what they say. The Johnny, the flamboyantly gay tower operator, who is just a non sequitur. The racist depictions of the tribe that Ted and Elaine worked with in the Peace Corps, with the sort of inherent basketball abilities. These things that just don't hold up. And some of the things that do are like ones that they keep coming back to, where they committed to the joke, like the guy in the taxi. That it's one of the very first things we see after the jaws open. And there is a post-credit Easter egg where the dude is still sitting in the taxi, which I have strong memories of Dad like snort-laughing at after the credits when we were kids. So those are some of the things that that we noted. I think you named this very articulately, in that one of the things that's disappointing about the sexual politics in this film is that this movie, like, really over and over and over again says, what do people expect and how can we lampoon it and how can we look closer at it and like subvert it? But it treats the sexual politics between Ted and Elaine and her as a prize for him, as just kind of furniture that they don't even see it enough to subvert it, to look more closely at it. And that's disappointing. And that's where, like, I'm angry at the Zuckers, but I'm more angry at the culture that made it so deeply ingrained. We also spent some considerable time talking about the sort of bigger cultural phenomenon of examples where a piece of media exists in reference to another piece, an older piece of media, and as an iteration of, as a spoof of, and then the original piece of media sort of falls into obscurity, and we're left with the parody, and how we see this happen. We've seen this happen several times. And one of the things that I think together we came to is the fact that when the parody reaches a level of humor that understanding the original references become unnecessary in order to find it funny, that's when we may see this greater longevity for the parody. I'm thinking now of like Weird Al Yankovic songs.
Yes.
As examples of that. Potentially the other ones that we named were Good Omens off of The Omen. And I named Bugs Bunny and his references to Liberace, and Liberace, who now I don't think folks in general, he's not someone who's like big in the cultural consciousness. It's not chilling in the zeitgeist anymore, as it were. Though those moments when we do see Looney Tunes and Bugs sits down at the piano and wishes his brother George were there, like we still enjoy those moments. So this film does pass Bechdel, so good on you there. And I think something that, I guess the last thing that I'll say, and then anything that I missed, you can lift up, is one of the things that I noticed. This film remains beloved, and as I mentioned, like is often voted on like top, in the top 10 or the top 20 funniest movies of all time. And in fact, Common Sense Media, which is a group that, I think they're mostly volunteers, but they're out there trying to help us parents, like be responsible in what media our children see. And they didn't seem too bothered by this film in ways that make me a little uncomfortable. It is very, very funny, and I'm not saying you shouldn't ever show it to your kids. And if you do, you should probably watch it with them to help talk through some of these moments of racism and sexism, and especially the moment of the pedophilia. That's, it ain't funny. So that's where I'm landing. What did I forget, Em?
We talked a little bit about how, like, I liked it as a kid in part because I take things literally, and so does the movie. So I really appreciated that. It felt like mine in a way. And that kind of shows me the neurodivergent friendly nature of this film, which also fits with why it would be beloved. Like, it's beloved because people watch it over and over again, and they find something new to laugh at. There's a lot of movies you watch it once, you don't need to see it again ever.
Yeah.
And this is one where like you are rewarded for rewatching. So there's that. And then something we didn't really mention, but I think is important to me, is you were talking about the person who kind of broke down what the gags were and like how many there were and what kind they were. And something that you always hear is like, yes, the best way to understand a joke is to talk through it, just to explain it in detail. But I actually just want to really quick lift up the fact that we tend to think of many things as inherent, including a sense of humor. And so when we say, like, if you have to explain a joke, it's bad, which I don't think is wrong. Like if someone doesn't laugh at a joke and you have to explain it, then yes, the humor did not work. But we take that to the point where it's like, you're either funny or you're not. And so like, I think it's really interesting and important to think about the fact that these gags were written, like that these were things that they thought about. And this is a skill that can be learned. And I'm sure that, that's not news to anyone who's a comedian, but this is something where, because we tend to think of like, either you're able to make that joke in the moment or you're not. And there's no way of like analyzing what's funny and figuring out how to make it work in your own writing or humor or speaking or whatever.
I think we could probably zoom out for creativity in general. Like, I think our culture treats creativity as something that you've got or you don't.
Yes.
And so to do some analysis around humor or creativity to say like what works and what doesn't, and how can we do more of what works, and treating it as a skill like any other, well, as opposed to something that like you've got the muse or you don't. I feel like we've talked about that on T-Pods before.
We have. Well, and in fact, the fact that this is a parody and they took the plot from 0 Hour, I was very explicitly taught, don't copy other people.
Right.
Whereas like, I don't think the people who taught me that would argue that the Zuckers aren't creative.
Right.
And it's like, know what you can do. Like, they knew we're not going to be able to create a plot to hang all these gags on. So we'll take somebody else's. But, it's still our movie because we are doing all of this stuff. And so recognizing like, you don't have to be all things to all people in creativity. Like we talked about this with The Princess Bride. Like, William Goldman recognized he's not going to be able to write a love story. So he skipped it. Like he figured out a way to write around it.
Yeah. It's great. Cool. All right. Well, that was fun. I actually did enjoy returning to it, and I really did laugh out loud a couple of times. Especially, I laughed the loudest at the altogether joke, but there were a couple of other moments that I laughed out loud, and a lot of smiles, one or two groans. So, yeah. So, are we back to you next week, Em?
Yes, next week. In honor of Thanksgiving, we are going to be talking about planes, trains, and automobiles. This is another kind of pattern interrupt because I haven't actually seen it. I've seen parts of it.
I didn't know that.
Mm-mm.
Interesting.
Never seen it. It's one of the ones where so people will be surprised that I've never seen The Godfather because I love movies. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not interested in The Godfather.
It's a good movie.
I know it is. It's been mansplained to me how important it is that as a movie lover, that I see it. That
no, I haven't seen Titanic, so I told and at this point it's like a thing. Like I can't see it, because it's like I've made it a thing.
Yeah. So. Well, this is like when you were bat mitzvahed as an adult, and every single one of our family members turned to me is like, "When are you doing it?" Never. Now, thank you.
Right.
You've made it impossible. So, so. There are films like that where I don't really feel weird about not having seen it. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, because it came out when I was like a kid in the 80s and it like part of the zeitgeist, I've always felt a little odd that I don't know it. And it's one of the few quotable 80s movies that I can't quote. So I was hoping to take a look at it, and I thought looking at it with completely fresh eyes could be interesting.
Cool.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, I'll look forward to that. I'll see you then.
See you then.
Do you like stickers? Sure, we all do. If you head over to guygirlsmedia.com/sign-up and share your address with us, we'll send you a sticker. It really is that easy. But don't wait, there's a limited quantity. Thanks for listening. Our theme music is Professor Umlaut by Kevin MacLeod from incompetech.com. Find full music credits in the show notes. Until next time, remember, pop culture is still culture. And shouldn't you know what's in your head?